Good morning. Welcome to Miami Church. If I don't know you, my name is Greg. I'm the pastor here. It's great to see you. Yesterday, my family had a birthday party, and if you're not a parent, it's great. So we had this birthday party for a bunch of 3- and 4-year-olds, and they did it at Splitsville, which is in Sunset Place. You know where that is, right off Sunset? It's a bowling alley. So imagine, right? Whose idea is this, right? Let's get 15 3- and 4-year-olds, and let's give them 10-pound toe crushers in their hands and let them just walk around in chaos, right? And so luckily, I don't think anyone broke their toe, but it was just chaos, right, for 2 hours. So we leave this party, and we get back to our apartment. As we're pulling in, I look over, and I see, we were in my wife's car. I look over to see my car, and I realize that the front passenger tire is flat. Like the rim is like literally on the ground. I'm like, great. It's like 2 o'clock on a Saturday afternoon. I'm like, great. And so I was like, well, I'm going to go get a pump, see if I can kind of pump this up. I don't really know what I'm doing. So I run. I have this little office where I study. I go to the office to grab this little pump thing that I have. And I walk into my office, and I don't know if you did, but I have a dehumidifier in there that kind of takes the water out of the air. So it's not. So I walk in, and the dehumidifier is leaking. And I walk in, and it's like water all over the floor. And I'm like, you got to be kidding. So I'm like, over, and I grab the pump. And I go, and I'm going to go try to fill the pump up with air to take the pump to the car. And about that time, my phone rings, and I get a call, and I say, hello. And they say, the fire alarm is going off at 2150 here. And I thought to myself, who came up with this stupid idea to do a series? Like, this is the dumbest idea ever. So I decided we're going to start doing a new series called It's a Wonderful Life. Or like, Your Best Day Ever. The greatest day in the history of the world. I just thought it would just be a much better idea because I don't need any more illustrations on It Happens. But here we are. So somebody's idea. And here we are, right? And we're in part 2 of this conversation, and we're just calling It Happens. And if you were here last week, we talked about this idea that we all have dreams, right? We all have these ideas of what we want our life to be. We dream about what we want life to be and what we want to accomplish. And then there's reality, right? Like life really does happen. And we said that, here's these dreams, right? And what you envision your life going to be. And then this is kind of your Monday through Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, right? And there's this gap, right, between what you dream your life will be and your relationships will be like and what is reality. And then, if you were here last week, we even said, hey, it even goes deeper than that. Like there's even a deeper idea here that has the stakes that are even higher, because I believe that you were created and I was created on purpose, with purpose, for a purpose. And that regardless of how you were conceived, there's no accident, and that you were formed in your mother's womb, and your looks and your personality and your quirks and your talents and gifts, all of that comes together on purpose, and there's deep meaning and there's significance in that. You were made for a purpose, with a purpose, on purpose. Now, I believe that you can only truly find your ultimate purpose in a relationship with God, in life with God. And I know there's some of you in the room, you don't buy that, you're not there yet, and that's okay. I just want you to hang with me for a couple of seconds. But I believe every single one of us, right, regardless of your story, regardless of your socioeconomic status, regardless of your country of origin, regardless of how much money you make, all of us were created with a grander purpose. There's deep meaning and there's purpose, and it's bigger than you. Your purpose is bigger than you. My purpose is bigger than just me. But what happens? It happens, right? Life happens. And so what we're trying to do in this conversation, this message series, is we're trying to just take an honest look at threats and issues that keep us, that keep you and they keep me from living the life we want to live, that keep us from living our grander, bigger purpose, that keep us from living what we're called to live. And so here's kind of our goal. We said this last week. Our goal in this conversation today and through this entire series is just to shine a light on the biggest threats to the life you really want to live and the keys to overcoming them. We want to just put a little spotlight on these threats, on these key core issues that keep you from living the life you want to live, that keep you from ultimately fulfilling your purpose. I'm going to try to kind of close the gap between like, here's who I am and here's who I want to be. And we want to talk about how do we close that gap. And so what are we doing? We're examining core issues no one expects, but all of us face. We don't see them coming, but all of us face these issues. And last week, if you were here in part 1, we talked about the idea of cynicism. We don't know who talks about cynicism, but the idea that over time, all of us, to a certain degree, we become jaded and cynical, and it keeps us from living the life we were called to live. And we talked about the idea of how do you kick cynicism in the teeth. And if you missed it, you can go to our YouTube channel, and all of our messages are there on YouTube and our Miami Church page. So today, part 2, here's where we want to go. This is going to be super exciting. I know you're on the edge of your seat, and here is where I want to go today. I want to talk about the idea of loneliness. No one clapped? Loneliness. All right? Feeling alone, feeling disconnected. Right? Can you identify the song that was just sung? There was lyrics in there. It says, have you ever felt alone in a crowded room when I'm with you? Have you ever felt alone in a crowded room? In fact, one author calls it this. He says, it's called crowded loneliness. Crowded loneliness. The idea that you can be around people. You can live in the middle of a global city with millions of people, in an apartment building full of people, in a neighborhood full of people, but yet you feel lonely even though you're not alone. Like, you ever feel lonely or isolated or disconnected even though there's people around? There's people around. The fact is, we've never been more connected as a culture, yet we've never felt more alone. The average person has over 500 friends on social media. We're about 12 years into the smartphone era where we had these smartphones. The first iPhone came out in 2007. And the reality is we've never lived in a time in history where we're more connected, yet people have never felt more alone. There's been a lot of studies done on this. I've done a lot of research over this in the past few months. And check out, just these are staggering. 47% feel left out. Every study I read says that loneliness is widespread in the United States and even around the world, with nearly 50% of people self-reporting that they feel alone and isolated. 46% sometimes or always feel alone. 43% feel their relationships are not meaningful. I mean, you can scroll through, right? Your feed, your social feed. Wow, everybody looks so happy. 43% feel isolated from others. 27% rarely or never feel there are people who understand them. 20% rarely or never feel close to people, despite the deepest human need to be known. 20%. And then check this one out. 18% have people they can talk to. Only 18% have people you can actually, I'm not like, hey, how's the weather? Or, man, nice car. I mean, like, the people you can talk to about deeper issues, things that are going on in your life. Most experts say that loneliness is a cultural epidemic. I mean, how is it that you can have 500 or 1,000 friends on social yet feel utterly alone? How can you be in a city or in a space that is surrounded by people but feel alone? Loneliness is increasingly being considered by experts to be a hazard to human health that's comparable to obesity and smoking. Feelings of loneliness affect all of us, right, if we're honest. But persistent loneliness can be serious, and it causes physical health damages, and it shortens life. In fact, the most recent study says that persistent loneliness, what it does to your body is the same as smoking 15 cigarettes a day. It'll kill you. In fact, this is interesting. In 2018, the United Kingdom, the UK, they appointed a loneliness minister because of what is happening with the chronic loneliness in their country. Now, here's what's interesting, too, and this seems reversed to me. As I'm studying this, I looked at this from different angles because it didn't make sense. But the research on social media interactions says that the loneliness is more pervasive in societies and among age groups where social media usage is the highest. So the higher the usage of social media, the more that you feel lonely. In fact, there was a study on generations that was done, and it basically is a sliding scale, right? The older you are, the less lonely you feel, and it was a sliding scale. The loneliness generations right now are millennials and Generation Z. The lonely, by far, the lonely. So the conclusion was the younger you are, the lonelier you feel. Yet you and I were created to be known, to know, and to be known. We were created to love and to be loved. Well, you could easily be out there like, well, Greg, it just sounds like there's a technology problem, right? It's just there's the technology problem, and we didn't have any of these problems until there was iPhones and iPads and smartphones and all of this kind of stuff. And we've all seen it, right? You've been there, right? You go out to the restaurant, you look over, and there's a family of 4, right? And dad's on his phone, and mom's on his phone, and kid 1's on an iPad, and kid 2's on, and you're like, why are you even out here? Like, could I just take your money to pay for my meal? Because what are you doing, right? Or you go to the coffee shop, right, and there's 2 friends sitting there, and they're on each side of the table, but it's like they're not even there. They're face to face, and one's on one side of the table, and the other's on the other side of the table. And you're like, they're like texting back and forth, like, ooh, I'm liking your picture right there. Like, you're 5 feet apart. Like, why are you not talking? And I do believe that technology is an issue, but I believe this. It's not just a technology problem. This is a human problem. And I think technology didn't create this issue. I think it reveals it. I think it amplifies it. I think it magnifies it. But this is a human condition. This is a human problem. In fact, if you go all the way back to the beginning of God's Word in the Bible in Genesis, the very first thing that happens, right, is here are these humans and their shame and guilt. And what do? They run and hide, right? They isolate themselves. They hide from the very beginning. And I believe a devious disconnection is underway in our culture, and it's not just a tech problem, it's a human problem. And my propensity and your propensity is to disconnect, to isolate, and it predates the iPhone. But here's the problem. It's killing us. I mean, literally, like physically, mentally, it's killing us. You look at the physical health, the mental health that's happening. This is not how we were created to live. In fact, not only is it killing us physically, but it's hindering us, it's keeping us from living the life we want to live, the life that we were called to live. And so this growing sense of isolation and loneliness, it's widespread, it's an epidemic. I feel it. In fact, if you feel lonely or alone today, you're not alone, right? So many feel this way. And I see it, right? I see it in my life. I see it in the lives of my friends and those I interact with here in this great city. It's real. And so here's the question we have to ask ourselves. Like, hey, when it all hits the fan, when life just goes crazy, when it happens, like, who do you call? Like, who do you reach out to? Like, well, maybe some family or whatever, but is there anyone maybe besides your family? Like, who do you reach out to? I remember, and some of you have heard this story, it's about 5 years ago. My wife and I, at that time, we had 2 kids. We had just moved here to Miami to help start this church. And we had just moved here with that. I think we'd only been here a week at tops. And I had to go to Orlando to have some meetings and try to help raise some support and some partners to help us launch this church. And so I'm getting all ready. I'm packing my bags, and I'm getting ready to go to Orlando, which I'm so looking forward to that drive up the turnpike. It's just so exciting. I couldn't wait. And I'm getting all my bags, and here's my wife, right, my precious wife, and 2 young kids. At the time, I mean, what were they, 5 years ago? Wow, what are they, like 3 and 2 or something like that? And I'm getting ready to go, and I'm going to the door, and she looks at me. And never forget this the rest of my life. She looks at me, and she says, if something happens, who do I call? You talk about a miserable 3-4 hours on the way to Orlando, right? If something happens, who do I call? And here's the truth for you and me, is that you and I desperately need to be known by someone's. We need to be known. You were created to be known. I was created to be known. And if you feel lonely, right, today, you're not alone, okay? Statistics tell us at least half of this room, if not more. But it doesn't have to be that way. In fact, I would say, hey, it's okay to feel that way, but we can't stay there. Disconnection and loneliness and isolation, it keeps you and me from living the life that we were called to live. It keeps you from fulfilling your life purpose. Now, I believe that we were created, right? We were created by God. God lives in community. We were created for community. We were hardwired, like down within our DNA into our core. We were divinely designed for community. We were designed to be known, to know by our Creator. And not just like, hey, I know your name, or hey, I saw you, I waved to you from a distance, but like soul level known. Like, what are your desires, and what are your passions, and what are your hurts, and what are your pains, and what are your longings? Like, we were created to be known, and we really need someones who know us. In fact, research backs up that. There's been a ton of research out of Harvard, and the conclusion of the research basically says you either have to have community or you die. That was their conclusion. Like, wow, okay, how much money did you spend there? That's great. Right? But something inside of us, right? Again, I think this traces back to the beginning. Something inside of us defaults the other way. Like when the heat of life gets turned up, right? When life gets hard, when we hit things, right? Our tendency, instead of to embrace or run toward connection and community, we tend to run the opposite direction, right? We tend to isolate, right? We tend to kind of get inside of ourselves, or to go to escape within ourselves. And again, this is not new. I think this human problem has been around for thousands of years before there was ever cell phones and technology. In fact, all the way back in some of the wisdom literature of the Bible, there was a wise guy, a really smart guy named Solomon, and he knew this. He wrote about it. You may be familiar with this. It's in Ecclesiastes chapter 4. You'll see it on the screen. Here's what he wrote. He knew this. He says, 2 people are better off than one, for they can help each other succeed. It's the idea of team and working together. Like yesterday when I had that flat tire, I was like, oh no. And I said, maybe I could fix it, probably, maybe, probably not. So what did I do, right? I got on the phone with someone from my neighborhood team and said, come help me, right? And together, well, he did all the work, but together, it feels better to say together. Together, I was able to watch him fix the tire on my car, right? Verse 10, he says this. It's a true story, Bob. If one person falls, the other person can reach out and help, right? So if you stumble, if you fall, it's like, does someone notice? Is there someone there that can reach out to help? And then let's look at this part. This is incredible language. It says, but someone who falls alone is in real trouble. Someone who falls alone. The original language is something like this. It's like, pity to anyone who falls and has no one to help them up. Pity to anyone who falls and has no one to help them up. Like, have you ever seen someone just fall? Like maybe it's financially, or maybe it was in their marriage, or they got sick, or morally, right? And there was no one to help them up other than maybe some family. Like, sad, right? And here's a question that we have to ask. It's not a fun question to ask, but who, you see it on the screen, who feels free to ask, are you okay? And will not. They will not accept I'm fine as an answer. Do you have somebody that can look you in the eye and say, hey, are you okay? And you're like, oh, I'm fine. Like, yeah. What? Look what Solomon continues, verse 12. He says this. He says, a person standing alone can be attacked and defeated, but 2 can stand back to back and conquer, right? This idea that someone's got your back. You know, you heard that saying, like, someone's got your back? Another way, a version says it this way. It says, one can be overpowered, but 2 can defend themselves. And that word overpowered, it could also be translated overwhelmed. Overwhelmed. You know, and the reality is at some point in your life, at some point in my life, you're going to be overwhelmed. You're going to feel overwhelmed. You are going to experience overwhelmed. And you need help. And I need help. And the writer is saying, hey, you need someones. You need people. And you know this, right? It's common sense. You know this. And then he gives some powerful imagery about this. He says this, the last part of verse 12, he says, 3 are even better, for a triple braided cord is not easily broken. A cord of 3 strands is not easily broken. And this is true. This has been my experience, right? I have seen people, right? I have seen people in my life who went through extraordinarily tough times. I mean, just crazy stuff. But they were not broken, right? Because they were surrounded by people. There was people beside them. In fact, I could say it this strongly. I've never met anyone who was in authentic community, who was really in authentic community, whose broken heart left him or her broken long term. Not anyone that was in authentic community, because the reality is, at some points in our lives, we have to be known, like deep soul level known by someone's. And so if you're here this morning, and whatever's been going on in your life, but maybe you walked in and you just feel alone. You're not alone. The reality is, the way you feel is not just you. I can tell you that. You're not alone. But the challenge for you and for me is it's okay that you're there today. It's okay. But it's not okay that you stay there. Because that's going to hinder you. It's going to keep you from living the life that you were called to live. It's going to keep you from experiencing and living your greater purpose. Now, there are some just simple, immediate solutions, right? There's a ton of research on this, a ton of writing, and so there's some things that go, hey, there's some things you could just practical, really, almost sometimes they seem a little cheesy. There's just some things you could leave here today, and within the next 30 minutes, you could put these into play, and it will help, right? It will move you that way. And so I think there's some things you could do, and here's just a few of them. There's more than I could possibly say here, but I mean, you could just make a decision right now, like, hey, I don't want to feel this way. I want to move toward connection. I want to move away from isolation. And so one of the things you can do is you can disconnect from technology. Again, I think technology is not the only issue here, but it is a factor. And so you can move away from technology because it does affect your soul. It affects your relationships. And it has an increasing and dramatic effect on our personal lives, right? It's part of the problem. It's a factor. So here's some real practical advice, right? Here's some things that you could do. One of the things I think that is just good for all of us is that you should share as many meals as possible with people. If possible, you should share as many meals as possible with people. So if you're a parent, if you have a family, you should make dinner time around the table a priority. As many nights of the week as you can to sit around the table. Again, it sounds old-fashioned, right? Sit around the table having dinner. Right? If you don't have any kids, if you're just husband and wife, you should make it a priority to have dinner together as much as possible. If you're single for a reason, single for a season, I don't know which one you are, but if you're single, right, you should seek out to have meals with as many people as possible. Right? There's a ton of research. Columbia University did a ton of research, and their research basically says that, hey, parents, if there's only one thing you can do to keep your kids from basically going to jail or killing someone or going to drugs or whatever. If there's only one thing you can do, their research has year after year, they've been doing this research now for 20 years, says if there's only one thing you can do, parents, is sit around a table and have a meal together. And if you do that 3, 4, 5 nights a week, the kids that experience that are much less likely to their lives getting off the rails down the road. And again, when you got to do that, put your phone away, turn the TV off, just have food and conversation. So a real practical thing, you want to move toward connection, put your phone away, turn your TV off, get rid of all your technology, and just sit face to face with someone and eat. You got to eat anyway. You might as well talk to someone. Here's another idea that one author says, and I think it's genius. It's like just whatever happened to just playing games, like old school board games, right? Card games. Right? We've started kind of resurrecting this a little bit at my family. Again, it seems so cheesy. Like, dude, didn't we do that in the 50s? Leave it to Beaver or something? But there's just something like just getting Monopoly out or playing Old Maid. Or one of the things I'm loving to do with my kids now is just puzzles. And you just put the technology away and it just forces you into conversations. Here's another one. There's a ton of research on this. It's a really practical thing that you can do. Is don't sleep with any kind of electronics in your bedroom. I know a lot of people, they charge their phone like on their nightstand right beside their bed. Every research I've ever read said that is the worst idea you could possibly do, right? It ultimately hinders your sleep, and if you don't, you get away from any technology in your room. Put your phone, charge your phone, put it in a different room. You're going to get better sleep and ultimately better relationships. Here's another just practical example, right? resist the urge to always look it up. Do you do this? Right? You'll be in a conversation, right? And like, where was that? He was in a movie. I know that. What movie was that? Look, oh, we got to look it up. Google, right? Or like, I mean, how many cubic feet are in a? None of you are having that conversation, right? Right? And you just look it up. You just every time, right? If there's any question, you just immediately go to Google and look it up. And what does it do? Right? Maybe it makes you 0.00%, 0.0001% smarter. But what it disrupts the conversation, right? Resist the urge to always have to look it up. Again, those are just some real practical things. But if I really want to get to the root of the idea of loneliness, the root of why almost half the people in the United States and even around the world identify as lonely, if I want to get to the root of that, if I want to get to the ultimate solution, I have to go to what I call the genius of Jesus. See, Jesus was smart. And I've said this a million times. I'll keep saying it. I believe, and again, you may not be here with me, but I believe that a relationship with Jesus will make your life better and will make you better at life. I mean, even if you don't, like, I don't know, Greg, about the Jesus Bible stuff, a relationship with Jesus will make your life better and will make you better at life. And Jesus was so smart. He knew all this. He knew the human condition. He knew how we were wired for community, to be known and to be loved and to know and to love. He knew that, right? And so he created, right? He created this way for us to be in a relationship with God. And then he said, hey, I'm going back to heaven, but I'm going to leave this thing that is going to be the train or the tool to keep people in community connection. And he called it the church. Now, I just said the word church. And right now, the majority of us in our room went to some picture, right? In the picture you have, okay, I have a picture in my head, right? It's a building somewhere, maybe somewhere from your childhood, right? It's probably a kind of a nicer, fancy building. My building has columns on it, right? And a big door. It looks like somebody's getting ready to get married up in there, right? And I walk in, and I don't know what your picture is, but my picture is these pews, right? There's like this big row down the middle. And on the side of, who invented pews, by the way? Is that the dumbest idea ever, right? These long, hard, uncomfortable things that are like 30 feet long, right? And you see them, and I'm picturing these, right? And then there's some guy at the front. Maybe he's got a robe on, some kind of priest-type guy, pastor-type guy, right? Church. But did you know when he invented church, when he created church, that was not at all what he was saying. Like we've created all of these things, like we've taken the original idea and we've added all of these layers and hoops and things and built all these buildings. And some of it's not wrong, some of it was done with good intentions. But it's not at all what Jesus had in mind when he said, hey guys, you need community. You need to know and be known. You need to love and be loved. And I know the human condition. And the genius of this is you need to be part of a church, a community. And we've created all this stuff. And that is not at all what Jesus had in mind. He says, guys, you got to live with common purpose and common place and common possessions. And the simple idea of church, right, just the simple, if you just go to the simple first century idea, the church is just a community of Jesus followers who live in community together, who just do life together. In fact, we cry with each other, and we rejoice with each other, and we just do life together. And guess what? If you just do that, you're going to be better off. Your health will be better. You will live longer. You will be healthier. You will have a better shot of reaching your dreams, of fulfilling your purpose. And it's not just a community of Jesus followers who do life together and love each other. That's part of it. But he says it's even better. He's not only do that, but then you take that you experience and feel in this life-giving relationships that you feel, and you take it and you push it out into the community, into the city. And it's not just for your sake, even though there are benefits for you. It's not just for your sake. It's for your community, for your neighborhood, for your city. And the reality is I can stand up today in front of you and not exaggerate and say that church changed my life. Right? Again, not the building church, not the pew church, not the person in the front with the robe thing church, but like real, authentic community changed my life. Because like many of you, I grew up around a church. I grew up around the things of God, did the VBS stuff and all that stuff. And it was fine, right? It was good people. Nothing bad happened. There was no terrible experience. It was fine. But it was all right. Whatever. That's cool. It's kind of a thing to do on Sunday. I'm cool with that, right? But then I got into my 20s, and I was living in Chicago, right? And anytime it drops below 0 degrees, you're always looking for some kind of Jesus or something, right? So here we are. I'm in Chicago, and I was in my 20s, and I was lonely. I wasn't married. I was single at the time, and I was lonely. So I thought, well, what do you do, right? Well, I default back to what I knew, right? Well, this is what I had experienced, right? So I end up at this church, right? And I just got to look for people like me. Right? Try to find some people like me who's into things like me. And I start looking around, and I tried a few things here and there, and the reality is I just kept striking out. Nothing was working. And then one day, and some of you have heard this story, one day there was this 6th grade student who came up to me and actually at a church thing, and she said, hey, why don't we just start getting together with people who live like right around us? Like, why don't we, there's this thing in we live, it was a village similar to like Coconut Grove, where there was just a little village with some shops and some restaurants. And she said, what if we just like on Thursday nights at 6:30 all just met? And there was like this little restaurant there called Egg Harbor. And she says, what if we just met in front of there and then just, that's it? Like, well, that's genius. And I thought, well, that's cute, little girl. That's fun. And you're nice. But okay, whatever. We'll try it. And so we did it, right? And I remember that. I'll never forget that first little Thursday. There was about 6 of us. And we were just like, okay. We stand in front of Egg Harbor, and we're like, all right, now what? Cool. Let's go get ice cream. Okay, that's a great idea. And we walked and we went and got ice cream. And then we did it the second week and the third week, and we just kept doing it. And before you knew it, there was like 40 people meeting at Egg Harbor at 6:30 on Thursday nights. Again, we didn't know what we were doing. There was no plan. It just kind of got word out. We started hanging out, and then we would go get ice cream or go do something, and we would end up at someone's house. And we would just start, and that started turning into doing life together and meals together and coffees together. And then we started like, hey, what about people in our neighborhood who have needs? And there was a single mom who was just struggling just to pay the bills and just to pay rent. And we started going over there and trying to fix up her house and help her out. And then it started even going bigger. And we're like, what if we like adopted like some people in another country that needed help? And so then we started formulating like trips to the DR, and we started going like, this thing just started growing and growing and growing. And next thing you know, there's like hundreds of people, all who live in walking distance to each other, right? All who live in walking distance, just doing life together. And here I was, I'm single in my 20s, and I'm going, what is happening? I have no idea. I'm not smart enough at this point to even know what's going on. Right? And I just remember just being in this home. This painted in my mind. I was being in this home, and they had this thing called soup night, right? And all they would do is like 3 or 4 people that would get these huge pots of soup, because in Chicago it's like freezing cold even in the summer, and you have to just eat warm food all the time, right? There's 2 seasons in Chicago, by the way, winter and July 4th, and so that's terrible. Apologize. Edit that out. Okay, and right, and so there's these soup nights, right? And they would just like 4 or 5 people would just these big, huge. I don't even like soup, but I would just go to this thing, and I just remember just being there, and I was just standing there. Again, I'm in like my mid-20s, and I'm standing in this thing like doing my little soup, tomato soup, like what is this terrible? And I'm looking around, and there's just people coming and going. And there's like older people like in their 70s and 80s, and there's like little kids just calling, and it's just chaos. And I'm single in my 20s, and I'm sitting there going, what is this? I've never seen this in my life. I've never experienced this in my life. Like, what is this? And the reality was I was experiencing, not because I was smart enough to know what I was doing, I was experiencing pure and authentic community. And over time, I became known. As a single 20-something, I became known, and I began to know people. And I felt loved. My family wasn't there. I felt loved. And I went from lonely and isolated to one of these, 18% that has no one to talk things, to surrounded by people and families who cared about me and loved me. And I said, wow, this is it. That's the closest picture I've ever seen to when I read about what Jesus and the first church did and how they established this community, right? And there were no buildings, and there were no pews, and there were no priests in robes. It was just people who loved Jesus and loved their neighbors, and we experienced authentic community. And so when we started this church a few years ago, we said, hey, we're just going to try to recreate this, right? We're just going to try. Again, we're not smart enough probably to figure all this out, but we're going to just try to recreate what this first church did, like in the first century. And we're going to just try to recreate what I experienced standing out in Chicago on these cold nights eating soup. We're just going to try to recreate that. And so we came up with this idea like, hey, what if we have just neighborhood teams? Like, what if over 30 years, right? This was just our dream. What if in 30 years we could look at a map of Miami-Dade and just like put little dots all over it, and all over the city were these homes, right? These apartments, these places that would just open up their homes to people who lived right around them in this geographical, from the oldest to the youngest. And what if we just sat at a table and just experienced meal? And we put our phones away and we turned the TV off. And what if we just looked people in the eye and just had conversation? And we got to know each other. And over time, it was more than just, hey, man, how's the weather? Or what's your job? It was like, dude, how are you? Like, what's going on in your soul? What is your longings? What are your desires? What are your dreams? What are your pains? Like, what if we could just walk life together? Like, we could just sit at a table together. And then what if we could just take God's word and just engage it together and just look at it and go, man, what is God trying to say to us? It's 2019 in Miami, and it's expensive and crowded and traffic's terrible. Like, well, how do we live in this? And when life happens, how do we live in this? And what if together we could fumble through that and it'd be all messy? And then we go, but guys, this just can't be about us. I mean, this is great. I love you guys, and I want to do life with you, but it just can't be about us. Like, then how do we go and we share this with our community? And how do we reach out and people like Glory House who are trying to help rescue people out of sex trafficking? And how do we help other local partners and things that are happening in our community? How do we do that? And so we started this thing called Neighborhood Teams. You saw it on the back of your Connect card. And now we have 3 of these going around our city. And our dream as we head into next year is there's 5 and 6 and 10 and 30 and hundreds of these, right? And so everybody in Miami-Dade could have the opportunity to experience this kind of community. See, I think that's the dream, right? When Jesus said, hey, I will build my church. I will build my church, and the gates of hell will not prevail against it. He wasn't like, oh, I'm just going to build these buildings with nice columns and pews, and right? There's nothing wrong with that, but that's not what he was saying. He's saying, I want to build these communities of followers of Jesus who do life together, who share the ups and downs of life, and then spread that out in their community. Now, where we are in the life kind of cycle of our church is our neighborhood teams basically kind of run through the school year. And so, as you guys know, we're only like 4 weeks out from school starting. So if you want to be part of a neighborhood team, you can check that on the back of your card. But we're kind of winding that down. And so our team said, hey, what are we going to do? Because summer, everybody's traveling and doing different stuff. What can we do this summer to help people move toward community, to help people move toward connection and away from loneliness and isolation? And so we came up with this idea, what we're calling Summer at Miami Church. In fact, the team is going to pass out these cards. And on these little cards, you'll see on one side, it's just helping people find and follow Jesus, right? And then on the back side, right, is you'll see it, they're coming across. It's just different events and activities that are going to be happening this summer. And again, is this a perfect solution? Is this the greatest thing that ever happened since cheese? Probably not. Yeah, somebody likes cheese. But this is a step toward, right? This is a step toward connection, a step away from isolation. And so you'll see there, the first one you'll see on there, Juan mentioned earlier, is baptism celebration, which is a Saturday coming up, June the 1st. And you'll see that, and there's trivia night, barbecue, bike rides, Sunday fun day, 4th of July, ice cream day, I'm there for that. Pool parties. Again, the goal of this, guys, the idea behind this is we know this is not the ultimate perfect solution. This doesn't solve all the loneliness issues in the Miami-Dade. But what we're trying to do is we're trying to help us move toward authentic, real relationships and connection. And so this is a step toward that. Because the research and the data and my experience, your experience, right, it tells us that many of us in this room, many of our friends, our neighbors, our co-workers, right, many of us feel alone and disconnected. That's the reality. And it's okay. Again, if you feel lonely today, it's okay to feel that way. But it's not okay to stay there. And if you want to live the life you were meant to live, if you want to fulfill your life purpose, you cannot do it alone. That is not how you were created. You were created for community, to be in community. And so if you want to achieve, if you want to accomplish your life purpose, you cannot do it alone. And so my prayer today is that you will take a step. It could be a small step, it could be a baby step, that you will take a step toward connection and community. Would you pray with me? God, I thank you that you created each one of us in this room for a reason. In fact, I believe that none of us are here, like at this moment. None of it's an accident, none of it's happenstance. God, I believe there's deep meaning and purpose. And God, I believe you are forming here. Again, we're not perfect. We don't have it all figured out. We're deeply flawed in so many ways. God, but I believe you are forming here in our hearts an authentic community that we can do life together. And God, I believe you're forming it not just for our sakes, even though we'll be healthier and better, but you're forming it, God, because you have a plan, you have a dream for this part of Miami and even all of Miami-Dade County, God, where you want to see authentic community, genuine, soul-level community happening in this city, God. People experiencing life, real life, and not just this surface level, oh, look, that's the glamour and the glitz, but like real deep life. So when life happens, God, that we're there for each other and we can live life together and do it in such a way that it impacts our city. And so, God, I want to pray a special prayer over those in this space right now who feel lonely and isolated. I get it. It's hard. God, I pray that even now and just only as you can, God, only as you in your unexplainable ways, that you could even wrap your arms around those of us who feel alone today. And the truth is we're not. You're here. And there's a whole room full of people here who really love you, God, who are seeking you and want to be part of something. So, God, move us toward this. I believe that there's hope in you, and I believe that there's hope for everyone in our city, God, because there can be authentic, real, deep community and connection that can happen. And so, God, thank you that you establish your church. And God, I pray that your favor and blessing would just fall on this church, God, not so that we can be all, look at us, but so that we can really establish true and authentic community in this great city. And we love you, God, and we pray this now in the name of Jesus.